Sarah stood at the window of their spacious home, watching the setting sun paint the sky red. Thomas was supposed to be home 3 hours ago. She looked at her phone again. No messages. The dinner she had prepared had long since gone cold. This house, once full of laughter and warmth, seemed too quiet lately, almost alien. Their wedding photo hung on the wall. Happy faces, shining eyes, sincere smiles. 15 years ago, they were ready to conquer the world together. "Where are you, Thomas?" Sarah whispered, touching the cold glass of the window. Suddenly, the phone rang. The screen showed the name of Martha, her best friend. "Sarah, honey, how are you?" Martha sounded concerned. "I'm fine," Sarah lied, trying to make her voice sound cheerful. "Is she running late again?" "Yes. An important meeting. You know?" Martha hesitated. "I saw Thomas today." Sarah tensed. "Where? At Le Petit Paris. He was not alone." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? It may have been a business meeting, but—" Martha paused. "That woman—" She kept touching his arm, and they were laughing. You know, intimate. Sarah felt her legs go weak. What did she look like? Young, slim blonde, in a business suit. At that moment, she heard the sound of the front door opening. "I have to go," Sarah said quickly. "Thanks for telling me." Thomas came in, loosening his tie. He smelled slightly of expensive women's perfume. "I'm sorry, my dear, an important meeting ran over," he said casually, not even looking at her. Sarah came closer, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "I was worried. You could have called." Thomas sighed in exasperation. "Here we go. I told you I had a meeting. I couldn't be distracted by calls. And what kind of meeting was it? At what restaurant?" Thomas froze for a moment, then slowly turned to her. "Why, do I have to report every step I take now?" "No, I'm just curious. We used to discuss everything. Once upon a time is once upon a time. Now I have more responsibility. You know how hard it is to expand a business." Sarah remembered how they started. A small office on the outskirts of the city, old furniture, one computer for two. She worked as a secretary, accountant, and cleaner at the same time while Thomas was looking for clients. They were a team back then. "Do you remember our first office?" she asked quietly. Thomas looked at his watch impatiently. "Sarah, I'm tired. Let's not do this now. Not now. It's always not now lately." "What do you want from me?" He raised his voice. "I work from morning to night. I'm giving us the life you've always dreamed of. I dreamed of a life with you, not expensive clothes and an empty house." Thomas ran his hand over his face. "Listen, I'm going to bed. Tomorrow is a big day." "With the same client?" Sarah couldn't help herself. He turned abruptly. "What do you mean?" "Sarah, nothing. I'm just asking." "Sarah, stop your suspicions. It's tiring." He gulped water from his glass. "I need to rest." The bedroom door closed, and Sarah was left standing in the middle of the living room. She walked over to the bar and poured herself a glass of wine. Martha's words about the young blonde kept running through her mind. The next morning, while preparing breakfast, she watched Thomas take a long look at himself in the mirror. New suit, new hairstyle, expensive perfume. When did he start taking such careful note of his appearance? "Will you be back early today?" she asked, placing the coffee in front of him. "I don't know. I have a lot of work to do. Maybe we can have dinner together? We haven't been to a restaurant in a long time." Thomas tensed. "I don't think so. I might have to stay late." "At Le Petit Paris?" The words came out of his mouth. He froze, then slowly looked up. "What?" "Nothing. I just heard they have great food there." Thomas quickly finished his coffee. "I have to go." When he left, Sarah went up to the bedroom. In the pocket of his old jacket, she found another receipt from the restaurant this time for $300, and a receipt from a jewelry store for a thin gold bracelet. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling her hands shaking. She remembered how a month ago she had noticed a lipstick mark on his shirt. Then he had explained it away as an accident. Then there were the strange phone calls he answered in a whisper, going into another room. On her desk, she noticed their company's documents. Flipping through the pages, Sarah suddenly realized that she didn't even remember the last time she had taken an interest in the company's affairs. She entrusted everything to Thomas, focusing on creating a cozy home. And Sarah went to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. In the reflection, she saw a woman who still looked young, but whose eyes were frozen with indescribable pain. She remembered her mother's words before she died. Never show a man your suspicions until you are absolutely sure. Otherwise, he will just hide better. And remember, a strong woman is not the one who endures, but the one who acts. Picking up the phone, she dialed the number. Martha? I need help. Do you know a good private detective? Oh my God, Sarah. Are you sure? Yes, I am. It's time to find out the truth. After hanging up, she stared at their wedding photo for a long time. Okay, she whispered to her reflection. Do you want to play games, Tomas? Let's play, but I'll make the rules. That night, she couldn't sleep for a long time, listening to the calm breathing of the man next to her. How long had he been a stranger? And most importantly, what should she do next? Sarah knew one thing. She was not going to be a victim. If her suspicions were confirmed, Thomas would regret underestimating her. After all, she owned half the business, although he seemed to have forgotten that. Good night, darling, she whispered into the darkness, feeling cold determination replace pain in her heart. The morning coffee had long since gone cold, but Sarah continued to sit at the kitchen table, reading the restaurant receipt she had found over and over again. Le Petit Paris was the most expensive restaurant in the city, and she and Thomas had only been there twice, on their 10th anniversary and when they signed their first big contract. $250 for dinner for two. I must be getting paranoid, she whispered, looking at the date on the receipt, last Thursday. The phone call snapped her out of her thoughts. It was Marta calling. Honey, how are you? You sound tired. Sarah sighed. I'm fine. It's just... Martha, do you ever feel like everything around you is wrong? Like you're watching a play where all the actors know their parts, but you? What's wrong? Thomas. Sarah hesitated. He's different. I'm finding strange things. Receipts from restaurants we've never been to, bills for gifts I never received. There was silence on the other end of the line. Marta? Are you there? Honey. My friend's voice became serious. Maybe we should meet? There's something I need to tell you. They agreed to meet at a small coffee shop far from the city center. Marta was already waiting at a table by the window. When Sarah saw her friend, she immediately realized that the news would not be good. I didn't know if I should tell you, Marta began, nervously stirring her coffee. But after what you said... What did you see? Last week I was at Le Petit Paris. They were celebrating a colleague's birthday. Martha paused. Thomas was there. He wasn't alone. Sarah felt her insides go cold. With whom? With a young woman. Blonde, slim, in a business suit. They were sitting in a separate booth. And? Sarah clutched at her coffee cup as if it could keep her world from falling apart. They looked very close. He was holding her hand, and they were laughing. Then Martha looked away. He kissed her hand. Sarah closed her eyes. All the details of the past few months flashed before her mind's eye. New ties, expensive perfume, late arrivals home, calls he answered in a whisper. Maybe it was a business meeting? She tried to find an excuse, although her heart already knew the truth. Marta shook her head. Business partners don't look at each other like that, Sarah. Back at home, Sarah began to notice things she had previously ignored. A new shirt with a subtle trace of lipstick on the collar, a bill from a jewelry store in her jacket pocket, a new password on her phone. In the evening, when Thomas returned, she tried to be as usual. How was your day? Normal. He didn't even look in her direction. A lot of work. Do you want to have dinner with me? I made your favorite lasagna. Sorry, I already ate. A work dinner with clients. What clients? She wanted to ask, but held back. That night, Sarah lay awake for a long time, listening to her husband's breathing. They used to fall asleep in each other's arms, whispering about their dreams and plans. Now there was a cold chasm of omissions and lies between them. The next day, she decided to come to the office unannounced for the first time in months. Thomas had always told her that she shouldn't worry about work matters, that he was in control. Now it seemed suspicious. A new receptionist met her at the front desk. "Mr. Anderson is in a meeting right now. He asked not to be disturbed. I am his wife, and co-owner of the company, by the way." "Yes, but," she hesitated, "he's with Miss Gray, and they're discussing an important contract." "Miss Gray?" The name rang an alarm bell in Sarah's head. How long had she been working with us? About 3 months. She's a lawyer from Brown and Partners. Very professional. Sarah walked past the confused secretary and into Thomas's office. She saw 2 silhouettes through the frosted glass. A woman's laughter. Thomas's hand on someone else's shoulder. Without knocking, she threw the door open. Thomas jumped away from the young blonde woman as if she'd been burned. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I decided to visit my husband at work. Is something wrong?" The blonde woman, obviously Miss Gray, smiled professionally. "You must be Mrs. Anderson. I've heard a lot about you. I'm Lillian Gray, representing Brown and Associates." "Young, pretty, confident," Sarah noted, and no ring on her finger. "Nice to meet you," she replied, noticing how nervously Thomas was adjusting his tie. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Important?" "We were just going over the details of the contract," Thomas said quickly. "Of course," Sarah smiled. "I'll let you get on with it." On her way out of the office, she noticed a receipt from the florist's desk for 3 dozen red roses ordered in the name of Lillian Gray. At home, Sarah pulled out an album of their wedding photos. 15 years ago, they had vowed to be together through thick and thin. She believed every word of it. She believed that their love was special, that they would always be a team. The phone rang again. "Martha, I found a person who can help us. A private detective, very professional. If you're ready." Sarah looked at her reflection in the window. Her eyes were full of pain, but there was a new light in them, determination. "No, not yet," she answered quietly. "I have to be absolutely sure first. And then we'll think about what to do next." The private detective's office smelled of coffee and old papers. Robert White, a man in his 50s with penetrating gray eyes, listened attentively to Sarah. "So, you want to know everything?" he asked, making notes in his notebook. Sarah clasped her hands in her lap. "Yes, every detail. Although I think I already know the answer." The detective nodded. "That's usually the case," he said. "Women sense betrayal long before they find evidence." He took out a folder. "First, I'll need a photo of your husband, his schedule, license plate number. I've got everything ready." Sarah held out the envelope. "There's a woman, Lillian Gray. She works at a law firm called Brown and Partners." The detective wrote down the name. "Okay. When did you last see them together?" 3 days ago, in the office, but I'm sure they meet in other places. Give me a week. I'll check everything, meetings, calls, financial transactions." On the way home, Sarah felt strangely devastated. She never thought she would have to hire a detective to follow her own husband. What happened to their love? What happened to their trust? A surprise awaited her at home. Thomas returned earlier than usual. "Darling, I'm home." His voice sounded unusually cheerful. Sarah froze in the doorway. Thomas stood in the middle of the living room with a huge bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers. "What is it?" she asked, trying to hide her suspicion. "Do I really need an excuse to please my wife?" He kissed her cheek. "Shall we have dinner together? I made reservations at your favorite restaurant." Something's wrong, Sarah thought. He never acts like this. During dinner, Thomas was extremely attentive, pouring wine, telling funny stories, holding her hand, just as he had in the early years of their marriage. "You know," he said suddenly, "I've been thinking, maybe we should take a vacation? Go somewhere together?" Sarah felt her insides go cold. "What about work? Your important meetings? Business can wait. You are more important." "He's sensing my suspicions," she realized, trying to divert my attention. The next morning, the first message from the detective came. Photos. Thomas and Lillian leaving a restaurant. His arm is around her waist. They are laughing. Sarah felt her hands shaking. The next picture showed them kissing by the car. The date is yesterday. An hour after he brought her flowers. In the evening, Marta called. "Sarah, are you okay?" "He was with her yesterday." Sarah's voice sounded deaf, right before he came home with the flowers. Oh, dear. You know what's worse? I'm not even surprised. Part of me knew it all along. A week later, the detective invited her to a meeting. There was a thick folder of documents on the table. I'm afraid the news is not good, he said, spreading out the photos. They meet regularly. Restaurants, hotels, joint trips under the guise of business trips. Sarah looked at the pictures in silence. Here they are in the park, holding hands. In a restaurant, he is spoon-feeding her. Near the hotel, a passionate embrace. There's something else. The detective pulled out bank statements. He started transferring money to separate accounts. And he hesitated. It looks like they're planning a trip together. A 2-week cruise next month. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. But he said he was going to a conference in Chicago. Unfortunately, that's a lie. The tickets have already been bought. For both of us. Back home, Sarah stood in the shower for a long time, letting the hot water mix with her tears. 15 years. 15 years of life, trust, shared dreams. And all this time At dinner, Thomas was inattentive as usual. By the way, I'm flying to Chicago next month. An important conference. For 2 weeks? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice from trembling. Yes, there are important negotiations. He stumbled. How do you know? I just asked. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She looked at the man sleeping next to her and thought, who are you? What happened to the Thomas I loved? The one who promised to be honest with me for the rest of my life? In the morning, she called Marta. I know everything. All the details. What are you going to do? Sarah looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were dry. All the tears had been cried. Nothing for now. Let him think I don't suspect anything. And then? She paused. Then we'll talk about our business. About all the documents he made me sign to reduce taxes. About all the accounts he opened in his name. Are you sure? Yes. He forgot one important thing. Half of everything belongs to me. And I'm not just going to give it away. Sarah hung up the phone and went to the window. A new day was beginning outside. A day when she stopped being a victim and started planning her revenge. I'm sorry, my love, she whispered, looking at their wedding photo. But you chose this path. Martha insisted on accompanying Sarah to the meeting with the lawyer. Michael Donovan's office was located in the old part of town, in a red brick building. Sarah nervously clutched her file as they walked up the stairs. Everything will be fine, Martha whispered, squeezing her hand. Michael is the best in the business. The lawyer, a man in his 60s with gray hair, met them in a spacious office. His penetrating gaze immediately inspired confidence. Mrs. Anderson, he pointed to the chair, tell me everything from the beginning. Sarah took a deep breath. My husband. He's having an affair, and he is preparing to leave me. Do you have proof? She spread the photos from the detective on the table. More than enough. But it's not just about cheating. He started transferring money from our joint accounts, selling assets. Michael looked at the documents carefully. When was the last time you checked the company's financials? Honestly? I don't remember. Thomas always said that he was in control, that I shouldn't worry about these issues. The lawyer shook his head. A classic mistake. Men often take advantage of their wives' trust in financial matters. He took out his glasses and began to study the papers. Well. Interesting. Do you remember these documents from last year about the transfer of some assets? Sarah nodded. Thomas said it was for tax optimization. Suddenly, Michael smiled. Your husband made a serious mistake, Mrs. Anderson. What do you mean? These documents. He tapped his finger on the papers. They effectively give you control of a significant part of the business. He probably didn't even read them properly. Sarah felt something inside her change. I mean, legally, you have a lot more rights than he thinks you do. And if he's planning a divorce... The lawyer paused. Let's just say he should be more careful. But how is that possible? Martha interjected. He's so meticulous in his dealings. Michael leaned back in his chair. You see, men often underestimate their wives. They think they are not serious about business matters, and that's their biggest mistake. He began to arrange the documents in a certain order. Look, here is the trademark transfer agreement. Here are the documents on the ownership of the real estate. And the most important thing is this additional agreement. Sarah listened attentively, and with every word the lawyer said, her gaze became firmer. Everything she had thought was her weakness, her trust in her husband, her willingness to sign documents without reading them, suddenly turned into her trump card. "What do you recommend we do?" she asked, when Michael had finished explaining. "Nothing for now. Let him think that everything is going according to his plan, but we will start preparing, quietly, methodically, without haste." He took out a new notebook. "First, we need a full audit of the company. I know reliable specialists who will do it unnoticed. Second, we need to check all bank accounts, including foreign ones." "We have foreign accounts?" Sarah was surprised. Judging by these documents, yes, and quite a few. "Your husband has been very active lately." Michael continued to give instructions, and Sarah felt a strange calmness wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she felt the ground beneath her feet. On the way home, she and Marta stopped at a small cafe. "How are you?" her friend asked, looking at Sarah carefully. "You know," Sarah stirred her coffee, "for the first time in a long time, I feel strong." "You were strong. You just forgot it. Maybe." Sarah looked out the window. "You know what's weird? I don't cry anymore. All the tears seem to have dried up." Martha squeezed her hand. "That's good. Tears won't help, but a cold mind is exactly what you need." At home, Sarah found Thomas working in his office. He didn't even look up when she entered. "Where have you been?" he asked absent-mindedly. "With Martha. We went shopping," she lied easily. "By the way, darling, do you remember those documents you asked me to sign last year? About tax optimization?" Thomas froze for a moment. "Why, nothing. I just remembered. You're so smart in these matters." He relaxed. "Don't worry about it, dear. I'm in control." "Yes, darling," Sarah thought as she left the office. "You are in control, for now." She went upstairs to her bedroom and pulled an old diary out of a drawer. On the first page was their wedding photo. Young, happy, in love. "You know, Thomas," she whispered, looking at the photo, "you taught me that. There is no room for emotion in business. Remember? Well, we'll see who's the better student." She picked up the phone and dialed Michael's number. "I'm in. Let's start the audit, and thank you." "For what?" "For opening my eyes. Now I know what to do." Putting down the phone, Sarah went to the mirror. A new woman was looking back at her, strong, determined, ready to fight for what she wanted. "It's time to start the game," she thought, "and this time I'm going to make the rules." The morning began as usual, with coffee and a cool bye from Thomas, who was in a hurry to get to another important meeting. Sarah watched his car disappear around the corner and thought about yesterday's conversation with the lawyer. "Okay," she whispered to her reflection in the window. "Where do we start?" Sarah went upstairs to their bedroom and opened Thomas's closet. She'd never allowed herself to go through his things before. Trust was the foundation of their marriage. But now, in the inside pocket of an old jacket, she found a business card for the Riviera Hotel with a handwritten phone number. In another jacket, she found a receipt from a jewelry store for a gold bracelet she had never seen. The phone rang. Marta. "Are you okay, friend?" Sarah sighed. "I'm trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. Did you find anything interesting?" "Little things. Receipts, business cards. You know what's worse? I start remembering all those moments when I should have suspected something. All those business dinners and urgent meetings. Don't beat yourself up. You just trusted your husband, and you were a fool." "No," Martha said firmly. "You were a faithful wife. It was he who turned out to be a scoundrel." After the conversation, Sarah went down to Thomas's office. Now she looked at the room with different eyes, not as a wife, but as a detective. Every detail could be important. On the desk were the company's documents, neatly folded, signed. Sarah started flipping through them, remembering the lawyer's explanation. Indeed, in many of the papers, her signature gave her more rights than she had thought. Suddenly, her eyes caught on an unfamiliar name, Blue Sky Investments. It was some new company, registered 3 months ago. Sarah took a photo of the documents on her phone. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Patricia, their neighbor, was standing on the doorstep. "Sarah, dear, I haven't seen you for a long time." "Come in," Sarah invited, trying to hide her irritation at the interruption. Over a cup of tea, Patricia, as usual, was telling the latest news from the neighborhood. Suddenly, she said something that caught Sarah's attention. "Did you know that your Thomas bought a new apartment?" Sarah almost dropped her cup. "What?" "Oh." Patricia put her hand over her mouth. "I thought you knew. I just saw him last week at the real estate office." "And what exactly did you see?" Sarah tried to sound calm. "Well, he was signing some papers. He had a young woman with him, a blonde." "Lillian." Sarah's mind flashed back to her. After Patricia left, Sarah dialed the detective's number. "I need information about the new apartment, and also, check out Blue Sky Investments." Thomas returned in the evening. He was in a good mood. "Honey, what's for dinner?" Sarah put a plate in front of him. "Your favorite lasagna. How was your day?" "He was fine. We signed a new contract." "With Blue Sky Investments?" she asked innocently. Thomas coughed. "How did you?" "Oh, I just saw some papers on your desk. I'm so proud of your success." He relaxed. "Yes, it's a promising project, but you're not interested in it." "Wrong, darling," Sarah thought. "I am very interested." Late in the evening, when Thomas fell asleep, she took out her phone and texted Marty. "I think he's preparing an alternate airfield. New company, new apartment." The answer came instantly. "Hang in there, girlfriend. We'll get him." Sarah went to the window. The city below was lit up with thousands of lights. Somewhere there, in this sea of light, was the apartment where her husband planned to run away with his mistress. There was the company through which he was withdrawing their joint money. "Nothing," she whispered. "Nothing is settled in this game." She pulled out a notebook and began to make a list of questions for the lawyer. Every detail mattered now. Every document could become a weapon. Thomas had taught her one important thing. There was no room for emotion in business. Well, it was time to put that lesson into practice, and she would be a very diligent student. Sarah sat in the lawyer's office, reviewing new documents. The detective had collected an impressive amount of information in a week. "So, Blue Sky Investments?" Michael spread the papers on the table. "The company was registered 3 months ago. Formally, the owner is a John Parker, but Thomas is actually in charge." "Why would he do that?" Sarah asked. "It's a classic asset withdrawal scheme. Look, your company signs contracts with them for consulting services, transfers money, and the money ends up in the company's accounts?" The lawyer nodded. "That's right. Almost $200,000 in the last month." Sarah felt her heart clench. Our joint money. "There's something else." Michael took out other documents. "The apartment you mentioned. It's in the name of Blue Sky Investments, but all the payments come out of Thomas's personal account." "How much?" $500,000 down. The rest is due within a month." Sarah shook her head. "He's getting ready to a new life. Without me." "Yes, but he made a mistake." Michael tapped his finger on the documents. "All of these transactions can be challenged. He's using joint assets without your consent." At that moment, Sarah's phone rang. Thomas's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, honey," she answered in a calm voice. "Where are you?" He sounded irritated. "At the mall." "Did something happen?" "No, it's just—" He hesitated. "I have an important dinner with clients tonight. Don't wait for me." "Okay." Sarah looked at the photos in front of her. Thomas and Lillian entering the restaurant. She hung up the phone and turned to Michael. "What do you recommend? Let's start one step at a time. First, you need to protect what you can salvage. Do you have any trusted people in the company?" Sarah thought about it. "Robert Collins, our CFO. We've been working together for 15 years. He knew me before Thomas." "Great. Set up a meeting with him, but be careful. No one can know." The next day, Sarah accidentally met Robert in a cafe near the office. "Sarah!" He was overjoyed. "I haven't seen you in a long time." "Hi, Robert. How are things at the company?" His face grew gloomy. "Honestly, it's not going well. These new contracts with Blue Sky, something doesn't feel right." "Can you tell me?" They sat in the cafe for 2 hours. Robert told him everything about the strange payments, about the new contracts, about how Thomas had started making decisions alone without consulting the board. "I wanted to tell you," he admitted, "but Thomas said you trusted him with everything." Sarah smiled bitterly. "Yes, I did, but now everything will change." That evening, she sat in her study for a long time, looking through old photographs. Here, she and Thomas are opening their first office. Here they are signing the first big contract. Here they are celebrating the company's 10th anniversary. A phone call interrupted her memories. It was a detective. "Mrs. Anderson, I have some new information. Your husband, he made a large cash withdrawal this afternoon. How much? $100,000. Sarah felt her insides go cold. He's getting ready to run. Looks like it. And then there was this. He'd booked the tickets. A cruise in the Mediterranean. For 2. When? In 2 weeks. Sarah hung up the phone and went to the window. Her face was reflected in the darkness, calm, almost detached. She no longer felt pain or resentment, only cold determination. She took out her phone and dialed Michael's number. "We have to act fast. He's getting ready to escape." "Okay, tomorrow at 9 in my office. I will prepare all the documents." When Thomas returned home, Sarah was already in bed. He quietly undressed and lay down next to her. "How was dinner?" she asked in a sleepy voice. "It was good. We signed an important contract." A lie, Sarah thought, another lie. But she said it out loud. "I'm happy for you, darling." She lay in the darkness, listening to his breathing, and thought about how everything had changed. They used to fall asleep in each other's arms, sharing dreams of the future. Now there was an abyss of lies and betrayal between them. "It's okay, honey," Sarah thought. "You wanted to play games? Well, let's play. Only now, by my rules." The evening was unusually quiet. Sarah stood by the window in the living room, watching the sky darken. Today was going to be the day. She couldn't hold it in any longer. On the coffee table were photographs, all the evidence of Thomas's infidelity that the detective had collected. Next to them were documents about secret bank accounts and apartment leases. Sarah was waiting. The front door lock clicked. Thomas entered, whistling a tune. He looked pleased, probably another successful day. "Oh, you're home," he said casually, untying his tie. "Is dinner ready? We need to talk." Sarah's voice sounded calm, almost distant. Thomas froze. "Is something wrong? Sit down, please." He sank into the chair, and then his eyes fell on the photographs. "What is this? What you tried so hard to hide?" Sarah took the first picture. "Here you are with Lillian, leaving the restaurant. That was 2 weeks ago. And here you are outside the Riviera Hotel. That was last Friday." Thomas tried to smile. "Honey, it's not what you think. Really?" Sarah laid out the bank statements. $200,000 transferred to Blue Sky Investments? $1 million apartment in a straw man's name? "You've been following me?" His voice was angry. "And you left me no choice?" Thomas stood up and walked around the room. "It's all explainable. Business is complicated. You just don't understand." "Oh, I understand everything perfectly well." Sarah pulled out another document. For example, cruise tickets. For 2 people. And for some reason, not in my name. He turned abruptly. "Who's helping you?" "Robert? That old fox has always been there for you. What does it matter? What matters is that I know the truth. The whole truth." Suddenly, Thomas's face changed. The tension disappeared, and a strange confidence appeared. "What are you going to do? What do you think?" "Well," he sat down in his chair. "Maybe it's even better this way. I won't have to explain." Sarah felt her insides go cold. "Explain what?" "I'm leaving you, Sarah. Yes, I'm having an affair with Lillian. Yes, we are planning to be together. She's young, she understands me, she shares my ambitions. And I didn't understand?" Sarah's voice trembled. 15 years of marriage mean nothing?" Thomas sighed. "You're stuck in the past. All this time you've been just a wife. Lillian is different. She sees the future with my money." He laughed. "Yours? Really? Who built this business? Who worked day and night? You just sat at home and spent what I earned." Sarah felt anger rise inside her. "I just sat at home? And who helped you in the early years? Who kept the books, cleaned the office, made coffee for the clients? Who supported you when no one believed in your success? That was a long time ago. He waved it off. Yes, it is different. You've become a liar and a thief. Thomas stood up abruptly. Watch what you say. I am still your husband. Not anymore, Sarah replied calmly. She took out another envelope. Speaking of business, you got so caught up in your intrigues that you forgot to check some documents, the same ones you made me sign for tax optimization. Thomas frowned. What do you mean? That I own half of the company, and I have veto power over all financial transactions. Nonsense. He rushed into his office. Sarah could hear him frantically flipping through papers. A few minutes later he returned, pale and shaking. It's impossible. It's quite possible. And one more thing, I've already blocked all the company's accounts. Not a single cent will go to your consulting services anymore. Thomas sank into his chair. You can't do this to me. Why? You were going to do something similar to me, only I plan to do it legally. She went to the door. You can pick up your things tomorrow. I'll be in the office going over the paperwork with our new CFO. What new director? Oh, you fired Robert last week. I had to bring him back, with a promotion. Sarah left the house, leaving Thomas alone among the scattered photos and documents. In the car, she finally allowed herself to cry, not out of grief or resentment, but out of relief. It was all over. The phone rang. Martha. Well? It's done, Sarah answered, wiping away her tears. No more lies. You've done well. Where to now? Sarah. Home. To my mom. I need a few days to just be myself. And the company? Sarah smiled. Don't worry about them. Thomas will soon realize that I was not just a stay-at-home wife. I have a plan. The office greeted Sarah with an unusual silence. It was only 8 a.m, and the employees hadn't come in yet. Only Robert Collins was waiting for her in the conference room with a pile of papers on his desk. Good morning, Sarah, he said as he stood up to meet her. How are you? Honestly? As if I've woken up from a long sleep, she put down her bag. What do we have? All the documents are ready. The board of directors will meet at 10. Thomas doesn't suspect anything? Sarah smiled bitterly. He probably hasn't recovered from yesterday's conversation. They leaned over the papers. Robert explained each document in detail. Here is a report on illegal transfers through Blue Sky Investments, and this is proof that Thomas used corporate funds for personal purposes. At this point, the door opened abruptly. Thomas stood on the threshold, angry, with red eyes from a sleepless night. What's this meeting behind my back? He turned his gaze to Robert. What are you doing here? I fired you. Mr. Collins has been reinstated, Sarah replied calmly, by a decision of the board of directors. What board? I make the decisions here. Not anymore. Sarah handed him a folder. These are the documents that put you on suspension from the company, until the internal audit is complete. Thomas grabbed the papers, frantically looking through them. This is illegal. You have no right. I do. As a co-owner and member of the board of directors. By the way, all your recent financial transactions have been blocked. What? He turned to Robert. Did you help her? You old traitor. I'm just fulfilling my duties as CFO. Robert replied calmly, and reporting the violations. At that moment, other board members began to gather in the conference room. Thomas looked around, and everyone was looking at him with cold politeness. Is this a conspiracy? He hissed. Are you all against me? John Peterson, the oldest member of the council, cleared his throat. Thomas, sit down. We have a lot to discuss. The next 2 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. Robert presented evidence of financial fraud. John read the report on the violation of corporate ethics. Sarah watched in silence as her husband gradually lost his confidence. This is a temporary suspension, John explained, until the investigation is complete. You can't. Thomas slammed his fist on the table. I built this company. We did, Sarah corrected quietly. Together. And you forgot about it. At that moment, the door opened. The secretary came in. Excuse me, Miss Gray is here. She says she has an appointment with Mr. Anderson. Sarah saw Thomas go pale. Not now. On the contrary, Sarah stood up. Send Miss Gray in. She needs to hear this too. Lillian came in, radiating confidence, but quickly realized something was wrong. Thomas? What's going on? Sit down, Miss Gray. Sarah pointed to an empty chair. We're just discussing my husband's financial fraud. In particular, a $1 million apartment registered to a shell company. Lillian turned her gaze to Thomas. What is she talking about? Not now, Lily. And about cruise tickets, Sarah continued. Very romantic, by the way. But I'm afraid we'll have to cancel the trip. Why? Lillian asked, confused. Because all the accounts are blocked, and Mr. Anderson will have to explain the origin of the money he has been so generous with. Lillian stood up slowly. Thomas, you said that you had everything sorted out, that the money was yours. Lily, wait. But she had already left, slamming the door. Thomas went after her, but John stopped him. Sit down. We're not done yet. For the next half hour, the council discussed the technical details of the suspension. Thomas sat in silence, broken and aged. When it was over, he approached Sarah. You've planned everything. No, dear. You planned it all. I just defended what was rightfully mine. She went to the window. It overlooked the city they had once dreamed of conquering together. You know, she said, not turning around, I would forgive betrayal, but not a lie. Not the way you tried to take away everything we built together. And now what? Now? Sarah turned to him. Now you pack your things and leave, and I will continue to run our company. Only now, without you. Thomas walked out, head down. At the door, he ran into Martha, who was just entering. Well? She asked, hugging Sarah. That's it, Sarah exhaled. It's finally over. Are you okay? You know, Sarah looked out the window. For the first time in a long time, I feel free. A week had passed since that dramatic board meeting. Sarah was sitting in her new office, Thomas's former office, reviewing the audit results. The numbers were even worse than she had expected. The phone rang. Robert. Sarah, he's here. He wants to see you. She sighed. Let him come up. Thomas entered the office, unshaven and wearing a rumpled suit. There was no trace of his usual self-assurance. We need to talk, he said, sinking heavily into his chair. About what? Sarah put down the papers. About how you withdrew $3 million through fictitious contracts. Or about the frozen accounts in Switzerland. Listen. He ran his hand over his face. I'll pay you back. Just give me time. Time? Sarah smiled bitterly. Did you give me time when you planned to take everything and run? That was a mistake. I was confused. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. The secretary came in. Excuse me, Mrs. Anderson. Miss Gray is here to see you. Sarah raised an eyebrow in surprise. Let her in. Lillian looked different, without her usual makeup and designer clothes. She was clutching her purse nervously. Mrs. Anderson, I came to apologize. Thomas turned abruptly. Lily, what are you doing here? What I should have done a long time ago. She turned to Sarah. I want to tell you everything. The accounts, the real estate, all the transactions. What are you doing? Thomas jumped up. What's right? Lillian replied. No more lies. For the next hour, Sarah listened to a detailed account of all her husband's machinations. It turned out that he had been preparing his escape plan for almost a year. Lillian was not just a mistress. She helped to draw up the documents, using her connections in a law firm. Why did you decide to tell me? Sarah asked when Lillian had finished. Because... The young woman looked at Thomas. Because he lied to me, too. He said the money was clean, that it was his property. And it turned out that he was a thief, Sarah finished. Thomas sat with his head down. You don't understand. I wanted to start a new life. At someone else's expense? Lillian stood up. You know, Mrs. Anderson, I brought all the documents, copies of contracts, bank statements. She placed a thick folder on the table. I hope this will help you get something back. When Lillian left, the office fell silent. Thomas looked completely broken. Now what? Now? Sarah took the folder. Now the law enforcement agencies will get these documents, along with the results of our audit. You can't... He trailed off. This is a criminal case. Yes, it is. This is what you wanted, Thomas. He suddenly fell to his knees. Please. I'll make it right. Just give me a chance. Sarah looked at the man she had once loved. Now he was a pathetic stranger. It's too late, she said quietly. You had your chance. 15 years of chances. There was another knock at the door. This time, 2 men in suits entered. Thomas Anderson? We're from the financial police. You need to come with us. Sarah watched as her ex-husband was led out of the office. At the last moment, he turned around. I really did love you. Once upon a time. I know, she replied, but you fell in love with money. When the door closed, Sarah went to the window. Downstairs, she could see Thomas being put into a car. Lillian stood nearby, watching the scene. The phone rang. Martha. How are you? It's strange, Sarah answered. I thought there would be more emotions, but all I feel is tired. And relief? Yes. Like I've lifted a heavy burden. She looked at the photo on the table, their wedding, their happy faces, their big dreams. You know, she said to her friend, sometimes the end is really the beginning. The beginning of what? Sarah looked at the city outside the window. A new life, without lies, no betrayal, just my life. She hung up the phone and picked up the file. There was a lot of work to be done. The company had to be saved, the trust of customers had to be restored. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt she could do it all. Because now she was free. A year later, Sarah stood on the stage of a conference hall accepting the Businesswoman of the Year award. The audience gave her a standing ovation. In the front row, Marta sat wiping away tears of pride for her friend. I want to dedicate this award to all the women who have found the strength to start over, Sarah said into the microphone, to those who were not afraid of change, who believed in themselves. After the ceremony, in the restaurant where his closest friends had gathered, Robert raised a glass. To our leader! In 1 year, under your leadership, Sarah, the company has tripled in size. To Sarah! Everyone chimed in. Martha hugged her friend. Who would have thought a year ago that things would turn out this way? Sarah twirled her glass thoughtfully. You know, sometimes the worst moments of our lives are the beginning of the best changes. She recalled that difficult period. After Thomas's arrest, there were months of exhausting work. We had to save the company, regain the trust of our clients, and restore our reputation. Do you know what happened to him? Martha asked quietly. He got 3 years. He could have gotten more, but Lillian testified. She's trying to start a new life too, opening a small law office in another city. John Peterson approached their table. Sarah, the board of directors wants to discuss a new development strategy. Do you have time tomorrow? Of course, she smiled. At 10 o'clock? Great! By the way, he hesitated. Did you hear? Thomas has asked for early release. Sarah nodded. I know. His lawyer contacted me. And what have you decided? I'm not going to deny it. I've had enough punishment. Later, when the guests left, Sarah went up to her office. She walked to the window, where she could see a magnificent view of the city at night. So much has changed in this year. The company had not only survived, it had thrived. Sarah implemented a new management system and opened branches in 3 cities. But most importantly, she found herself. The woman who was always inside, but hiding behind the role of just a wife. The phone rang on the table. My mom. Honey, I saw you on TV. Such a beautiful speech. Thanks, Mom. Sarah smiled. How are you? I'm fine. Your garden near the house has blossomed. You will come to see it, won't you? I will. This weekend. After the conversation, Sarah pulled out an old photograph of her and Thomas's wedding. This picture used to cause her pain. Now, it was only a little sadness and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, looking at the photo, for the lesson, for making me stronger. There was a knock at the door. Robert. Are you still working? I was just leaving. Just remembering the past? No. Sarah put the photo back in the drawer. I'm thinking about the future. They walked downstairs together. Robert suddenly stopped near the car. You know, I've been wanting to take you out to dinner for a long time. Just dinner, without talking about work. Sarah looked at him. A reliable, honest man who was always there for her. You know, I would like to. On the way home, Sarah thought about everything that had happened, about the betrayal that could have broken her, but made her stronger, about the trust she learned to appreciate, about the love she had finally found for herself. At home, she went to the window. The city below was glowing with thousands of lights, as beautiful as her new life. A life in which she was not Thomas's wife, but simply Sarah, strong, successful, happy. There was a diary on the table, a new one with blank pages. Sarah opened it and wrote, "Sometimes what seems like the end is actually the beginning. You just have to have the courage to start over and believe in yourself." She closed the diary and smiled. There was a whole life ahead of her, her life, and it promised to be beautiful.